Hello, my friends. So, welcome. Welcome to episode one of the Chronic Presence podcast. My name is JC. I am going to be your host. I am the president of Annam Sayer Services, which is a counseling practice in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. I'm also the founder of Chronic Presence, which is a mentorship brand for company founders who desire deeper purpose in their lives outside of what they've created in their careers. And I guide them through this process, mostly using principles of generosity, vulnerability, and, as the name indicates, presence. So I have been guided by God to share my own healing testimony, which is really the core foundation for all of the work that I do publicly, within my counseling practice, and personally. And I find it really interesting that I was told from up above that it was, in fact, time to start sharing my healing story and my personal experiences just about a week and a half ago. So I got some equipment to help me record podcasts, videos like this. And not 5 days later, I was at a conference with an incredible, incredible group of conscious leaders and women who are really changing the way that the world operates in business. And I received the Legacy Bearer Award at that event, during which time I shared very briefly about some of my own healing. And I had a lot of people request a longer, more in-depth story about my journey. Nothing is ever coincidence. Of course, I got the message that it was time to start sharing, and then I got literal, actual requests from real life people who desired to hear more about it. And here we are at 7:49 on a Monday morning. And I haven't particularly planned or scripted anything that I'm going to share. I'm going to try to keep this in smaller segments so people can listen in 20 or 30-minute episodes. But there are a lot of aspects to my healing journey, and so there's probably going to be quite a few episodes on that. The overview that I would like to share for those who want to follow along, just so that you have an idea of the types of things I have really in my soul been able to overcome, but also the things that I am still overcoming. I have healed from alcoholism, bulimia, sex addiction. I am still in recovery from autoimmune disorders and conditions. However, that physical piece is probably where I'm going to start today, because that is what got the requests at the event. I have gone from scoring higher than most military veterans on the PTSD index, post-traumatic stress disorder, to not really scoring on the index at all. I met the diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder and dissociative identity disorder years back, and no longer score on any of those. I say score on those because I didn't choose to go the route of actually going through diagnostics with psychiatrists or psychologists. So these scores were done by other mental health professionals who didn't have the letters behind their name that allowed for actual diagnoses to happen. And that was a conscious choice. I didn't want to go that route for myself. So that's a little bit, I think that kind of summarizes the addictions, the behavioral disorders, the emotional and psychological disorders that I have been challenged by in my life. And I want to share with you all how God and perseverance and presence has led me out of all of it to where I am today. When I received the Legacy Bearer Award at this event called $1 Billion Vision, the piece of my story that I shared was the fact that 6 months ago, I was still in and out of a wheelchair. And when I received that reward, I stood up. I walked to the front of the room. I think from watching the video, I actually wasn't even limping, which is fabulous. And a lot of people at that event asked me, what the hell? How did that even happen? What do you mean wheelchair? What wheelchair? I know there was a couple of people who knew each other in the audience, and they actually told me afterwards they were texting each other being like, what wheelchair? Where the hell is the wheelchair? So I I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and uveitis, which are two autoimmune disorders, when I was a year and a half old, or just a little bit more than that. I was under 2. And I have been in and out of experiences with chronic pain, chronic inflammation, and hospital visits, medical treatments since then. I would go periods of time when I was younger without pain, without flare ups. And I would also go through weeks or months at a time where I was unable to walk unassisted, or I was unable to just participate in life, I guess, the way that a lot of children do. And so that's been a really critical teaching curriculum in my life. Most recently, when I was 28, I'm 32 now for context. When I was 28, I had been in remission from symptoms of autoimmune disorders for 3 to 4 years. My lifestyle was very active. My idea of fun was packing up a hiking pack and heading out into the woods by myself for a few days. So I would go backcountry camping, um, mostly alone. I would occasionally go with another person. I kayaked every day. I lived on the water at the time, so that was a really big part of things. In the winter, I snowshoed many, many, many kilometers a day. So my physical body became a very pinnacle aspect of how I identified. I identified myself as very strong, very active, very adventurous. I traveled internationally by myself multiple times as well. And my physical body was a really important part of that because of the strength that I held and how it allowed me to be hyper independent. That's another episode in and of itself. So at 28, after a number of significantly stressful experiences, I ended up going back into a significant flare with the autoimmune symptoms. It started off a bit sporadic, and over the course of about 6 months, it went from flare ups every few days to the point where I was unable to live on my own because I couldn't get in and out of bed unassisted. I was unable to prepare meals for myself. And that was all due to pain. So the pain that I was experiencing in my body at that time was significant enough that I couldn't lift items, or I couldn't keep my balance. I couldn't walk. after that flare up began, I ended up going to Orlando, Florida for 6 months to seek medical treatment. I mentioned in the beginning, I am in Eastern Canada and we don't have access to much in terms of medical care. And so I chose to go to the States to get help. Very, very glad that I did. Very grateful that there was the resources and the people, connections, very, very open hearted, loving people who could support me in that. When I came back from that, back to Eastern Canada, I was still in a lot of pain. I had to come back because my 6 months stay time in the United States was up. I didn't have a visa, I was just there as a tourist. So at that time, I began some medications. I suppose that's important context. This entire thing, I did this without any pharmaceuticals. Um, that remission period that I had of 3 to 4 years, I was on no pharmaceuticals for the first time in my life. And I became very attached to this idea that I could heal myself by myself, that I didn't need pharmaceutical assistance. And that in and of itself was actually a trauma response from feeling as though I didn't have a say in my earlier life around the types of pharmaceutical medications I had been given. Okay. This went on for 3 more years. So in total, this entire bout of pain and incapacitation and trauma responses was about 4 years long. It included trips to Mexico for stem cell therapy. It included attempts at healing through multi-$100,000 worth of treatments, holistic treatments, hyperbaric therapies, DMSO, methylene blue. No, that's not right. Methylene blue. Lots of different supplementations, homeopathic doctors, naturopathic doctors, all the Joe Dispenza meditations that I could possibly get my hands on, working with God, praying, physical activity. I went through every avenue that I could possibly fathom. And every single one of those things played a critical role in healing parts of me that needed to be seen and healed in the process of getting my body stable again. I worked with mentors. I worked alone. I cried a lot. I have the most incredible, incredible partner, my fiance, who met me actually in the midst of this. And I did not know what he was getting himself into when we got together. We got together when I came home from Orlando. So I was a year into this process, and then we've been together since. So he has held my hand, been by my side. There were months on end where he had to care for me to the same degree that you would have to care for an infant. Essentially, I couldn't get on and off couches, in and out of bed. I couldn't cook for myself. I was truly physically incapacitated. And it was so hard, guys. It was so hard. There were many, many, many times that I would go to bed praying, begging God to let me go to sleep and not wake up. Not because I didn't want to live my life, but because I was at that point in time, I was suffering so deeply. And I was watching the people around me suffer so deeply at what they were watching me experience. However, I also know that if any of us are still here, if there is still breath in our lungs, it is because God is not finished with his plan yet. And I remember saying to my stepdaughter when she was 8, 2 years ago, she asked me if I was ever going to get better. This is very, very hard for the kids to watch, as I'm sure you could all imagine. And I said to her, I will get better. And I know that I will get better, no matter what that means. And I'm just going to keep praying. I know that God loves me. I know that this isn't the end. And of course, she was 8. She didn't really understand what that meant. However, maybe a month or 2 months ago, her and I revisited that conversation. She remembered it. And she was praying for something herself. And she said, well, it didn't work right away. And I said to her, do you remember 2 years ago when I said, I'm going to keep praying and I'm going to get better? And she said, yeah, I remember. And I said to her, I'm better now. Because she's a kid and they just say everything. She goes, well, you're not that much better. You're still kind of slow. You can't run yet. And she's right. I can only run a little bit now. However, I'm walking. I'm up and downstairs unassisted. I am going to CrossFit 3 days a week. I can deadlift 50 pounds. And 8 weeks ago, I still could not lift 10 pounds. And so that was one of those full circle moments where I got to recognize that my faith showed her as well that we just don't give up. We keep praying. We keep showing up. We keep facing whatever it is within us that's holding us back. And all of us get to come out the other side of whatever that is. And so here I am, 4 years, almost to the day, actually, from when I left Canada and went to Orlando for treatment. It was 4 years last week. I just realized that right now as I'm speaking to you. And I can tell you without a shadow of doubt that I am healed and I continue to get stronger each day. That doesn't mean that I never have pain. That doesn't mean that I have the same physical capacity that I had 6 years ago. But what it means is I am free from the suffering that I had been living in. Do you remember at the beginning of this when I said this is completely unscripted? I have no idea where I'm going with this conversation, guys, but I know that it's going to be fucking great. So I would like to talk about keeping ourselves stuck and how keeping myself stuck in something that I became attached to as the way I was going to do it and the right way to do things, I'm going to say prolonged my healing journey, and yet I can't regret a moment of it because of the depth to which it instilled this understanding. And so I mentioned before that I was very attached to the idea that I would not take pharmaceuticals. Anyone who is familiar with the concepts, like the neuroscience backed concepts or the biblical concepts of manifestation, understands that what we obsess over not doing or not being, we end up becoming. Because God and the universe speaks in frequency and vibration, and what we obsess over emotionally, with emotional intensity, comes into the material form. And as such, what did I obsess over? Absolutely, fully and wholly, I obsessed over the fact that I am going to do all of this without a single fucking medication. And so I'm going to say 6 months ago. Yes, 6 months ago, I was post stem cell treatment. I had lost 20 pounds in 2 months. The inflammation was the worst it had been in my 4 years. And trust me when I tell you, that is saying something. My organs were shutting down. I could not digest or consume food. I could not, I struggled with incontinence. I was peeing my pants 3 times a day because I physically had that little strength left, that even my pelvic floor muscles couldn't function. I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night from agonizing pain. And I had a conversation with my doctor, who suggested that I, maybe take some drugs, give myself a little hand. And I said, no, I'm fine. It'll be fine. I'm going to get through it. A week later, my boyfriend at the time, now fiance, sat me down and said, if you don't do something different than what you're doing, 6 months from now, I'm going to be at your funeral. And you can't do that to me. I get emotional every time I tell this story because it was just the moment amongst many. We had had many, many conversations, and this man had never once in 3 years pushed me in the direction of making a choice that would make his life easier. He respected every single process that I went through, and it was hell for him to watch. And for him to be seeing something that I wasn't seeing, and to say that to me, it hit that realization part of me that I had actually given up, despite saying that I was going to get better. I had actually given up, and I was at that point where I would go to bed every night and my prayers were to not wake up. And so in that moment, not in that moment, it had actually been a couple of weeks leading up where I had been processing resistance, fear, and ego attachments to this idea that I would heal without medication. I had to take a few different steps to get through this. And when it came down to it, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And when I finally shut the fuck up and listened to what God was saying to me, instead of praying for him to make my will the reality, I was driving and I heard as clear as day, I have been throwing answers in your face for weeks, and you've been refusing them. And it came to mind this parable that we often will tell in our day and age. I don't know if you've heard it, but there was a man out in the ocean and he was begging God to come save him so that he wouldn't drown. And a helicopter flew by to pick him up, and he said, "No, I'm waiting for God to save me." And someone came by with a life raft, and he said, "No, I'm waiting for God to save me." Someone drove by in a fishing boat, and he said, "No, I'm waiting for God to save me." And then he died. And when he got to heaven, he said to God, "God, I was begging you, I was praying for you. Why didn't you save me?" And God said, "I sent 3 people to save you, and you turned them all away." And I had this realization, this moment, that I had been so afraid of medication. I was so afraid of what I thought would make me more sick. I was more afraid of the side effects of any medication than I was of the side effects that were happening to my body from where I was in, like that state that I was in. And I surrendered. You're going to hear that a lot in all of the aspects of my healing journey. At some point, you're going to realize that I gave up control, gave up my attachments to how I wanted to do it, and I surrendered to God. And to what? I surrendered into obedience of what God was asking me to do all along. Had I been more surrendered, I probably would never have needed the medication. But because I was so desperately attached to the right way to do this, the right way to heal, I had to do the thing I didn't want to do in order to get rid of the fear of that thing. And so I started taking a round of medication, and I was able to work through the fear of it. And over the last number of months, I've been able to wean off to almost none of that exact medication, that exact thing that I was so scared to take. And along the way, I have continued every single decision that I have made around what is the next best step for me in my healing journey, in my strength journey. I have gone to God first, and I have asked him to show me what he knows is best. Because, y'all, I tried it my way and it didn't work. All right. If it was going to work my way, it would have worked years ago. And so I knew that I needed to exercise. I knew I needed more physical activity. And I got to I laugh. You're going to see me do this. You're going to see 2 things a lot in this podcast. You're going to see me cry a lot because I cry from joy, from gratitude, from just emotion. And I laugh a lot because I truly think the human condition is comedic. I call it the cosmic giggle. So I got a gym membership and I was like, I'm gonna push through. I'm gonna do it my way. I'm gonna get the cheap gym membership and I'm gonna show up every day. I didn't fucking show up every day. I hated going to the gym. Hated it. When I surrendered to God, lo and behold, suddenly one of my close friends posted a video of her CrossFit gym. And I looked it up and I looked at the price, the membership price, and I was like, oh, I don't have the money for that. And God laughed, as will happen, and said, all right, well, I told you what to do. It's not up to me if you listen or not. So again, I surrendered and I decided to just do it. I wasn't getting the results I needed showing up to the gym by myself. So I got a hold of the CrossFit gym, and turns out the owner of this gym is an angel on earth. Because, you guys, I showed up there at the beginning of 2026. I could not lift 10 pounds off the ground, and I could not lift 5 pounds over my head. I could not put weight on my hands. And I would really like to emphasize that I showed up in January in that state, and I was nothing short of 75% improved from my condition previously, if that gives you context for how unwell I was. I have 1 pound weights at my house, and I could not lift the 1 pound weights off the rack. So my 2026 goal for myself was to be able to lift 50 pounds. I expected this to be something that I was getting to in, say, November, like towards the end of the year. I thought I would have this really, really slow build up. I did 18 deadlifts a week and a half ago at 50 pounds each, 6 weeks after starting at this gym. Because not only was I willing to meet myself where I was at and just accept my own limitations in the moment, to work within them to see where it could get me instead of trying to force myself into something I wasn't ready for. But the owner of this gym, again, Earth Angel, was willing to meet me exactly where I was as well. There was no shame, there was no condemnation or judgment around the state that my body was in. It was just, okay, this is where we're at, this is what we have to work with, and we're going to build from here. And so surrendering to God, trusting God that if my gym membership is, I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure exactly what it is. Is it 300 a month? Maybe. I think so. At this point, had I not surrendered to God and trusted Him in that process, I would still be fighting, like fighting through 1 or 2 workouts a week at the cheap gym because that's what I could afford, or whatever other bullshit excuse, which really just came down to I don't believe in myself. At the end of the day, right? Those stories are all I don't believe in myself. I don't think I'm worth it. I don't believe that I can make it worth that amount of money. Whatever. We all have some variation of those stories in different aspects of our life. And I just decided to stop living in that paradigm. I decided to stop living in a world where those excuses, those stories, those lies held any power over me. And so the gym was one of those spaces that I surrendered. Another thing that I surrendered, deeply, deeply surrendered in, was this concept, this idea, this obsession that I had that some treatment out there, some supplement out there, some practitioner out there was going to be my saving grace. Everything has a place, but God is the saving grace. God's divine intervention is the saving grace. My ability to slow the down and shut up and listen is the saving grace. And I stopped every treatment that I was doing in terms of like, I have to do this much chiropractic. I have to do this much osteo. I have to do this much massage. I have to do this massive supplement routine. I stopped all of it. And I just started praying, surrendering, and being obedient to my next steps. What I can tell you is that the medication helped. The gym membership helped. The meditations helped. The prayers helped. Every bit of it, the supplements, the right ones, they helped. But nothing created healing in me like letting go of my own need to control everything and to understand everything. And this ability to surrender into the hands of God, to trust that I am loved deeply and that I don't have to do everything myself. That is what healed me. That is what is healing me. That surrender, that trust brought my body out of a state of fear and turmoil into a state that I can physically breathe, that my nervous system can settle, that I was just looking at the time. I told you guys I was going to make it short, and that didn't. When I stopped having to control everything, the answers fell into my lap. It didn't mean I didn't have to work hard. Like, it's not easy some days to get up at 4 a.m. to go to CrossFit before coming to work. It's not easy some days to sit down and meditate when I feel scrambled. It's not easy some days to show up like this. But when you are doing something that's difficult, in direct obedience with surrender to what you know is right, you can do it without burnout, without suffering, without inner turmoil. And at the end of the day, it was the surrender to the steps that I was shown that brought me from a wheelchair, unable to walk, unable to eat, unable to have sex. Guys, you know how hard it is to not be able to have sex? Because every time you breathe wrong, your body is screaming in agony. Not a good time, all right? You want to talk about sweet angels on earth? My fiance is the most patient man on the face of the planet. He was far more patient than I was, because I got real grumpy without it. And yet that was another thing I had to surrender to, that there was times that that was not something that I could be part of. I could not participate in because my body wasn't ready for it. There's so many things, so many micro aspects, and it's those microscopic surrender moments in each and every day that leads all of us out of whatever suffering we're in. This was a bit of a story, and really I feel like I just scraped the tip of the iceberg on it, but this was a bit of a story of how surrender helped me heal my physical body, how it allowed me to do the things that I was resistant to do the things that I was scared of, to break free of the anxiety and the trauma responses that had actually locked this type of disorder into my body. And the reason that I want to share all of these experiences, all of these things that I've healed from, is because I know that y'all are dealing with it too. It might not look the same on the outside, but doesn't everyone at some point in their life have something that's just gripping gripping them and hanging on to them, and you feel like you can't let it go because letting go is scary, because it served you in some way, because it kept you safe somehow. And so I hope that as I go through these different conversations, I can shed some light on that experience for you. I don't take things too seriously either. That's sort of a part of myself that I truly just love so deeply. When I was praying about how to show up on this episode today, on day one, I just kept feeling myself laugh, and that like joyfulness that I move through the day with, because like I get it, things are hard. I'm not trying to dismiss that when you're in the pits of hell, it feels like you're in the pits of hell. But have you ever just stopped and actually looked at how ridiculous it is? The things that we cause ourselves so much stress and anxiety about, and how incredibly dramatic our inner world can be. You know, don't film this. Someone's going to judge you. Then the world's going to hate you. Then you're going to get canceled. And then you'll never make any money. And then you'll be homeless. And then you'll die. If you allowed yourself to actually go down the melodrama, almost without fail, you would find that the fear is associated with a fear of death. Like our body, our nervous system, the lies that we tell ourselves truly think we're just going to die all the time. And we are physically all going to die at some point. So maybe, I don't know, call me crazy, but maybe we could laugh about it a little bit more. And that can be part of the journey as well, because good God, I see it so often. I've done it myself so many times that we're so serious, and healing is so serious, and everything has to be meaningful and purposeful, but in a serious way. And there's a time and there's a place for the compassion and the slowness and the deep heartfelt connection, eye contact. Like, it's there, it matters. But like, what's the point of doing all of this if we're not doing it so that we can be joyful, if we're not doing it so we can laugh more, if we're not doing it so we can actually be more present in the moment without all of the layers of mental attachment and suffering that keeps us like just so serious, you know, when you just have to be so serious about like, anyway, there's my tangent for the day. Laugh a little more. I truly from the depths of my heart want to say thank you to anyone who has listened or watched the whole way through. If you have questions, if anything that I've said sparked a question, whether it's a philosophical question or a spiritual question or a question about my personal lived experience, please send me a message, a DM on Instagram, an email. I will have all of those contact pieces in the show notes. I truly want to answer what people want to hear. And I have so much love for every single person, whether I know you in human form, whether you are technically a stranger. I love you. And I am so glad that you're here.